Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is to tackle one of the most frustrating, almost maddening contradictions of modern life. It's the feeling that you are constantly being gaslit by the economy.
That feeling is incredibly widespread right now. I mean,
Yeah.
you turn on the news and they tell you that the national economy is roaring,
Roaring. Yeah.
that growth is back, and that, everything is fundamentally on track.
But then you walk into a grocery store, or you look at the monthly rent bill,
Yeah.
or you try to figure out how you're going to pay for car repairs, insurance, or, your kid's next tuition payment. And there's this palpable stomach-tightening worry that just it completely clashes with those headline numbers.
It does. The data says boom, but your wallet screams bust.
Exactly.
And we are diving into that specific friction point, that collision between the upbeat macro statistics and individual lived financial reality.
It's a paradox, and it's one that's really defined by numbers that seem impossible to ignore.
Right. And the specific data point that anchors this entire debate is the one everyone cites.
The big one.
The big one. The U.S. economy is expanding at its fastest pace in 2 years. Gross domestic product GDP is accelerating to an annualized 4.3%.
4.3%. I mean, to put that in perspective, that is a number that historically signals exceptional health, real momentum.
It's a massive number. And yet, the public mood remains stubbornly sour. This is the heart of the prosperity paradox.
And the polls back this up.
Consistently. Polling shows that what looks like a strong economy in the aggregate simply does not feel like one when you're standing at the checkout counter.
Or when you look at the mortgage renewal.
Or just dealing with that lingering fear of potential job loss and the instability that brings. The confidence metric has not caught up to the output metric.
So on the surface, we have this massive contradiction, a roaring economy on paper, but a nervous, highly cautious population in reality.
And what we're setting out to prove in this deep dive is that this isn't actually a contradiction at all. It's more like a necessary diagnosis. That widespread anxiety isn't confusion on the part of the consumer. It's a direct symptom of what we can call the prosperity gap.
The prosperity gap.
Growth that is structurally and heavily concentrated at the top, creating intense financial strain for everyone else below.
So the mission then is to peel back the layers of that 4.3% figure and see what it's actually measuring. And maybe more importantly, what it's deliberately ignoring.
Exactly. We need to dissect how the number is constructed before we can truly understand why it feels so divorced from reality for most people.
Okay, let's unpack this, and let's start with that core number everyone cites. GDP? That's where the story of growth begins, but it's also, as we're finding out, where the story of economic misrepresentation often starts.
We have to begin by looking at the function and, more critically, the limitations of GDP as a measurement tool.
Right, because GDP is always the headline number. When economists want a clean, measurable, big number to signal national health, that's what they reach for. But for our audience, for you listening, we need to move past the simple definition. We know GDP is the total value of goods and services produced, but what is it missing right now?
Precisely. We should assume the listener knows what GDP is and immediately focus on how it's currently misrepresenting reality. The problem is that GDP is a measure of activity, not necessarily welfare.
It measures velocity, but not direction.
Or fairness. Not at all. I recall the analogy we've used before. It's like the class average.
Right, the class average. But it hides the students who are failing. So let's extend that. If the class average is an A, why might the students still be miserable?
Because of a few crucial blind spots.
Yeah.
Firstly, GDP fundamentally fails to measure distribution. It is totally blind to inequality.
So give us an example of that.
Okay, so if one person earns $10 million and 9 people earn nothing, GDP registers a robust average income. But it completely misses the abject poverty and despair experienced by the majority.
But that's the root of the prosperity gap right there.
Yes, it is. And crucially, it measures activity regardless of the quality or sustainability of that activity.
Right. This is the second major limitation.
Absolutely. GDP treats all transactions equally. A massive oil spill cleanup boosts GDP because money's being spent on labor, equipment, resources.
Which is just, it's absurd when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
Spending $1 million on medical treatment for public health crisis registers the same in GDP as spending $1 million on building sustainable, affordable housing. It measures the cost of a negative event, like a natural disaster or a major car repair, as a positive contribution to growth.
So the very act of fixing things that went wrong, which indicates stress, actually boosts the health metric. It makes the economy look stronger than it feels.
And that leads to some really perverse outcomes. Furthermore, GDP largely ignores non-market activities.
What do you mean by that?
It doesn't count volunteer work, or childcare provided by a parent, or improvements in environmental quality, or even the simple act of growing your own vegetables.
Things that create massive real-world value.
Huge value. And they reduce household strain, but they're invisible to the GDP calculation.
Okay, let's bring this back to the massive 4.3% figure we're wrestling with. If GDP is so flawed, is the 4.3% figure itself misleading, even just as a measure of activity?
That's a critical question, and the answer is complex, but
Yeah.
yes, I think so. We need to look at what specifically drove that sudden acceleration to 4.3%.
Because it's not always what it seems.
Right. A significant component of strong GDP numbers often comes from factors that are temporary or that don't translate into immediate personal financial relief.
Okay, let's deep dive into those structural drivers then. The things that might be artificially inflating the perception of widespread strength.
We can point to a few areas. One major boost often comes from inventory investment cycle.
Inventory investment.
So when companies produce a lot of goods but haven't sold them yet, those unsold goods are counted as inventory investment in GDP calculations.
Wait, so if I manufacture 1,000 widgets, but they just sit in a warehouse gathering dust, that still counts positively toward the 4.3% growth figure?
It absolutely does,
Yeah.
at least until they're sold or written down.
Yeah.
So if companies over-anticipated demand and built up significant stockpiles, that short-term inventory accumulation can provide a powerful but fleeting boost to GDP.
So it shows production strength.
But it immediately signals future weakness. It points to a coming slowdown in manufacturing until that inventory is cleared. It's a sign of a potential bottleneck, not sustained consumption.
That's a crucial nuance. It means the economy could be growing because of things we didn't buy yet, not because we're all confident in spending freely.
Exactly. And the other factor that can significantly skew the number is government spending. Large infrastructure projects, defense contracts, or shifts in subsidy distribution. They all register as major positive drivers in GDP. And while these are necessary and provide long-term benefits, they are centrally planned investments. They're not organic reflections of private sector confidence or increased household income.
So we have a headline figure, the 4.3% annualized growth, which might be significantly boosted by unsold goods sitting in warehouses and by necessary government projects, neither of which directly translates into a feeling of security or a lower grocery bill for you listening.
But this brings us to the core insight. The GDP number tells you the class average is rising, but it fails to reveal which students are failing, which ones are exhausted.
And crucially, why the average is rising. Is it organic, broad-based confidence, or is it these temporary structural anomalies like inventory cycles?
And if we look purely at the number, the core insight is that a fast-growing economy does not automatically become a widely shared economy. It can grow robustly, while financial anxiety among the majority also grows.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises a really important question. If the national average is rising so aggressively, accelerating to 4.3% annualized growth, where exactly is the underlying economic pressure building for the majority of people?
It has to be driven by something fundamental about how that growth is being distributed.
That realization takes us perfectly into the mechanics of this unequal recovery. Let's move to our next core topic, which is the consumer spending and the unequal recovery, the true engine driving that seemingly magnificent 4.3% growth rate.
A major, undeniable contributor to that stronger GDP reading has been consumer spending. American consumption is resilient.
It is.
And that resilience looks like immense strength on paper. People are still buying, still paying, still showing up.
Wait, hold on. If that 4.3% growth is driven by consumer spending, doesn't that inherently mean a broad base of people must still be participating? Otherwise, the number would collapse. Is the K-shape truly that rigid if spending is driving this growth?
That's the essential challenge to the K-shaped concept, and it forces us to apply nuance. The growth is real, but the segmentation is profound. The key is to ask, whose spending is it?
Okay.
It turns out that a massive amount of the spending driving that 4.3% figure originates from a specific financially secure segment. The rest of the population is participating out of sheer necessity, not confidence.
Let's break down the two groups that create this split. Let's start with the group we are calling the stabilizers.
These are the higher-income households. They haven't just recovered from recent economic shocks, they've thrived. They benefit immensely from surging asset values, rising real estate prices, and crucially, the strong performance of the stock market,
Right, so their retirement accounts, their investment portfolios have inflated.
creating a huge psychological and financial buffer.
And that buffer is what gives them the confidence to spend, and spend lavishly.
Absolutely. They maintain a consistent high pace of consumption, particularly on big-ticket discretionary items and services, things like high-end travel, luxury goods, large home renovations.
This sustained consumption is the statistical stabilizer for the entire economy.
It is. Their spending is disproportionately powerful because they have the means to purchase high-value goods, which significantly boosts GDP figures. They are spending because they can comfortably.
So when GDP looks strong, a huge component of that strength is the confidence of this relatively wealthy segment. It's their willingness to buy a new car, take an expensive vacation, or invest in a second property.
Yes. Their confidence masks the financial juggling act of the vast majority, which brings us to the second group, the endurers.
These are the lower and middle income households. For them, resilience is, well, it's the wrong word. Their experience is one of grinding endurance.
For the endurers, spending is driven by need, not choice. They're spending because they must, not because they can comfortably afford to.
They're buying essential food, paying non-negotiable utilities.
Covering rising transportation costs.
Mm-hmm.
But they're cutting back aggressively in every other area. They're juggling bills, they're delaying major necessary purchases like a new refrigerator or vehicle replacement, and often relying on credit.
So the stabilizers are driving the growth in services like five-star dining and international travel, while the endurers are driving the growth in high-interest consumer debt just to cover the cost of ground beef and electricity.
That is the shape of the modern two-track system. We're not just talking about statistical divergence. We're talking about two entirely different economic realities existing under one GDP headline.
And this is precisely why that concept, the K-shaped economy metaphor, remains so potent and relevant. It captures this blunt reality. The overall economy can rise.
That top bar of the K is shooting up,
Right, fueled by asset inflation and high-income discretionary spending.
while individual lives below that threshold diverge dramatically. One group climbs the economic ladder effortlessly, while the other is just scrambling to hold on or falling behind.
What's fascinating here is how the robust spending of the confident few, the stabilizers, can completely mask the financial juggling act of the endurers. It makes the national statistics, that 4.3%, entirely misleading about the lived experience of the country.
Just think about the effect on overall consumer credit card debt. It's rising dramatically.
Yeah.
That's a sign that people are using tomorrow's money just to afford today's necessities. That's endurance, not prosperity.
It creates a strong national average, but a high median personal anxiety. And that anxiety is largely driven by one key force that attacks the endurer group disproportionately: inflation.
Which is the perfect segue. We've established who is spending. Now we have to look at what they're spending it on, because that reveals the mechanics of financial pain. So now we address the quiet engine of resentment: stubborn inflation and lagging wages.
This is where we need to get into the granular nuts and bolts of the household budget.
We do.
The perception for so many Americans is that inflation has just run wild, but as you mentioned earlier, the overall numbers suggest it's decelerating. So where's the gap between the official deceleration and that feeling of relentless extraction?
The reality is highly nuanced, and the key is the baseline. Inflation has certainly not returned to the calm many Americans remember from before the pandemic.
What was that like for comparison?
Over the decade before the pandemic shock, average annual inflation hovered around a much calmer 1.7%. We are certainly not there now. And more importantly, inflation has become sticky in the areas that matter most to the working population.
And critically, even when the overall inflation rate appears manageable in the aggregate, the experience of inflation is intensely personal. It's highly concentrated. It's not evenly distributed across your shopping basket.
Right. And we should acknowledge the mixed shopping basket. There is some good news that often makes headlines.
Okay.
We have seen items like eggs become, 13% cheaper year over year?
13%.
Milk prices slipped by 1%. And yes, gasoline has been relatively controlled, falling to a national average of $2.86 per gallon.
That is a 4.5-year low. It's a far cry from that $5 per gallon shock we saw back in 2022.
These are real, measurable wins for the inflation data.
So if key commodities like eggs, milk, and gas are down or controlled, why does the weekly trip, the monthly budget, still feel like a constant financial extraction?
Because the daily life of the endurer group is not solely composed of volatile commodities that can deflate quickly. This is where the quiet extraction happens. The daily life essentials have moved sharply in the opposite direction.
And these costs are inherently sticky.
They are. They resist deceleration. They are the non-negotiable costs that consume a larger share of lower and middle income budgets.
Okay, let's talk about those rising essentials, the things you absolutely cannot budget down to zero.
The first area of pain is utilities and housing. Look at utilities. Electricity costs are up by 7% on average. Natural gas, which is the most common home heating source for many Americans, is up 9%. These bills are non-negotiable, particularly during season changes, and they consume hundreds of dollars monthly. That creates immediate budget strain.
And this ignores the massive generational increases in housing costs. Even if the rate of rent increases has slowed, the high base level is locked in for millions of renters.
Absolutely. And soaring home insurance costs are often overlooked. Insurance, especially auto and home insurance, has become a major pain point, increasing far faster than the core inflation rate.
And why is that?
It reflects higher replacement values, more frequent climate-related claims, and rising labor costs for repairs. When the cost of keeping a roof over your head and a car on the road, both necessities for employment, jumps dramatically, the entire household feels brittle.
And let's not forget the staples, the things you buy every week, where that 4.3% growth figure offers absolutely zero comfort.
Food remains a huge source of weekly budget anxiety. We see items like ground beef, a staple protein that many families rely on, surging 15% year over year.
15%.
Car repairs, essential for getting to work in an aging vehicle fleet, rose by 10%. And yes, even smaller daily comforts that provide mental relief, like coffee, climbed a massive 19%.
Okay, just think about the hypothetical endurer family facing that 7% utility hike, the 15% ground beef price surge, and the 10% car repair bill. They aren't canceling a Mediterranean cruise.
No.
They're deciding whether they can afford to keep the heat at 65 degrees or if they need to dip into high-interest credit just to cover the month.
That is the lived arithmetic.
Yeah.
When those specific, sticky essentials, housing, utilities, transportation, food staples rise sharply, and people are forced to trim everything else, the economy stops feeling like it's improving. It feels like a machine that's constantly extracting more from the household budget each month just to maintain the status quo.
And this extraction leads directly into the second part of this equation, the wage battle. We know that the labor market was tight for a while, leading to wage growth, but that increase is only useful if it restores breathing room against the extraction we just detailed.
And for many, it simply hasn't. We have to look at the segmented nature of wage increases. Deposit data suggests that paychecks decisively outpace prices only for higher-income households.
The stabilizers again.
Exactly. Those higher earners cleared the inflation hurdle and achieved real gains in purchasing power. They're the ones contributing to the robust discretionary spending.
But the people struggling the most, the lower and middle income earners, are still playing catch-up against this rising tide of necessities, and their wage growth is alarmingly weak relative to the cost of living.
That's right. For the critical middle-income earners, wage growth was only around 2.3%.
2.3.
And for lower-income wage growth, the increase inched up only about 1.4%.
Wait, if ground beef is up 15%, electricity is up 7%, and car repairs are up 10%, and a middle-income worker only got a 2.3% raise, they are definitively losing purchasing power.
They are.
They are objectively poorer this year than last year, despite the economy achieving 4.3% growth.
This is the quiet engine of resentment we spoke of. It's not that people necessarily expect to become instantly rich. What they want is for their current pay to stop losing battles against the relentless, sticky rise in the cost of living essentials. They're working just as hard, but their life is becoming harder to afford.
And that reality is the ultimate undermining of the 4.3% GDP growth figure. It means the money is flowing to the top, stabilizing that upper K segment, while the bottom segment is dealing with rising expenses that their stagnant wages they cannot possibly cover.
And this pressure cooker of rising costs and lagging wages leads directly to a crucial psychological shift. It moves us away from just the numbers and into how people feel about their future security.
Particularly their job security.
Exactly. And now we come to the psychological tipping point: job security and hiring caution. This is where the abstraction of the economy meets the fear of the personal fall.
Intuitively, if the economy were truly booming, meaning widespread prosperity and confidence, workers would feel safe.
Yet losing a job would not imply catastrophic instability. It would mean a temporary inconvenience before finding a new, equally good, if not better, opportunity in an expansive market.
But the confidence indicators are painting a very different picture than that 4.3% GDP number suggests. This is a critical divergence because consumer confidence isn't just about what you can afford today, it's about what you fear losing tomorrow.
And the data is clear on this psychological downturn. The share of consumers expecting job openings to become more plentiful over the next 6 months has fallen to the lowest level in 4 years.
Wow.
And moreover, more and more people are actively reporting that it's harder now to get a job than it was previously. They sense the cooling labor market before the official statistics fully reflect it.
That's astonishing. If national output is surging at 4.3%, why is the labor market feeling tighter and more precarious for the individual worker? Why are companies, which are clearly generating more revenue, why aren't they hiring more people?
We have to look at the official unemployment data, which reinforces this mood of caution. Unemployment has risen to 4.6%. Now, while that number is historically low, the movement matters far more than the absolute level.
It's the direction of the trend.
It's a 4-year high, up from 4% earlier in the year. That 0.6 percentage point jump, combined with the fact that job seekers outnumbered available jobs for the first time in 4 years, that signals a profound shift in power.
That single statistic, job seekers outweighing available jobs, that's a profound marker of psychological change. It means the perceived power balance has shifted back towards the employer.
It has.
The job hunt is taking longer, the leverage for wage negotiation is shrinking, and the fear of being laid off is rising.
Absolutely. When this shift happens, the economy stops being a triumphant number, like 4.3%, and it becomes a pervasive mood. And that mood is characterized by extreme caution, by delayed discretionary spending even among those who could afford it, and by the ingrained habit of worrying about the future.
People worry about holding on to the job they have rather than actively seeking a better one.
That's right, a behavior known as labor hoarding.
But if companies are achieving massive output growth of 4.3%, why are they hitting the brakes on hiring? We need to look at the structural reasons for this corporate caution.
This is perhaps the most important detail missed in the headline numbers. Companies are achieving that 4.3% growth while keeping payrolls tight for 2 key structural reasons.
Okay, let's start with the technological driver. That's something that benefits GDP but can hurt the worker.
The first involves technology and efficiency, automation and AI. Businesses are rapidly learning to produce more goods and services with significantly fewer workers.
So productivity goes up.
Productivity statistics increase dramatically, which is excellent for GDP, but it simultaneously reduces the need for new hiring and even encourages subtle workforce trimming. Why hire 5 new people when 1 new AI subscription can handle the same workload?
So productivity gains, while theoretically great for the national economy and the GDP headline, are directly contributing to the feeling of job scarcity and instability for the endurer group.
Precisely. The second structural driver is the profit priority and policy uncertainty.
Okay.
Many companies are choosing to prioritize maintaining high profit margins over expansion and widespread hiring. In an environment where companies face public and political scrutiny over price increases, they found a different way to boost the bottom line: cutting costs,
Particularly labor costs.
or simply refusing to expand their headcount significantly. They could produce more with their existing, highly productive staff, capture that 4.3% growth, and keep the labor market just cool enough to prevent wage spirals.
And the policy element, how does uncertainty affect hiring decisions?
When there's ambiguity around major economic factors like impending changes to corporate tax structures or regulatory shifts, or uncertainty around trade rules and tariffs, it freezes corporate planning.
So they wait and see.
They're hesitant to make large long-term investments in hiring when they can't reliably predict their operating costs or their ability to access markets 2 years down the line.
So the immediate protective reaction for a company is to hit the hiring pause button, which then just exacerbates the psychological anxiety felt by the general public.
And the result is an economy that continues to print impressive growth figures, like the 4.3% expansion we started with, while households are feeling the very real labor market cooling beneath their feet.
This whole discussion just crystallizes why the gap between the economic headlines and public sentiment isn't an error in perception. It is quite literally the lived arithmetic of daily life for the majority of people.
Which brings us to our final synthesis and really the true measure of well-being.
So let's reconnect this entire journey back to you, the listener. We started with a triumphant number, 4.3% GDP growth. But what we found is that this high number does absolutely nothing to lower your electricity bill, which is up 7%.
It doesn't make ground beef cheaper, which is up 15%.
Nor does it guarantee that the job market will catch you if you fall, especially when job seekers are starting to outnumber available openings for the first time in 4 years.
And most importantly, that high GDP number does not calm the dread of watching those critical, sticky prices rise while your wages barely move. Especially if you're in the lower or middle income brackets, seeing only 1.4% or 2.3% growth. The high output comes at the cost of managing daily life.
This means that if policymakers want Americans to actually feel the economy is strong, they have to stop making the mistake of equating national expansion with true well-being. They're measuring the size of the pie, but ignoring the fairness and the basic manageability of the slice for the majority.
The shift must be away from merely chasing abstract GDP and toward measures that build confidence and security in everyday life. And that requires specific policy aims focused on the pain points we've identified.
So what builds that crucial confidence for the endurer group? It starts with paychecks that stretch further. It's not just about them being nominally higher, but having real purchasing power against those rising costs of essentials.
It also requires a labor market that feels secure, not just an economy that looks productive on paper due to AI and automation, but one where the worker feels protected and where opportunity feels expansive, not shrinking.
And finally, it demands more predictability in the rules that shape business decisions, things like trade rules and corporate tax structures. When rules are predictable, companies are encouraged to hire and invest long-term, rather than freezing their planning due to uncertainty.
The central rejection we see from the public is clear. They are not rejecting economic growth itself. They are rejecting an economy that is growing without them. When prosperity concentrates so heavily at the top, achieving that 4.3% by relying on the spending power of the wealthy and the strained endurance of the rest, trust in the entire system, it collapses.
In the end, the ultimate question for us to take away is not whether the economy is expanding, we have the 4.3% proof that it is, but whether that expansion is actually improving the conditions of ordinary life.
Is it making the act of living, working, and planning for the future easier? Or is it simply making the rich richer and the national report card look good?
Until life feels reliably more manageable, until that feeling of anxiety is lessened at the checkout counter, and when looking at the bills, the public mood will likely remain grim regardless of how impressive that headline number looks on the news.
This raises an important question for you to consider, the learner who wants to be well-informed. If GDP is insufficient, what key indicators should we track instead?
What's the one thing that measures the manageability of everyday life? Perhaps the ratio of median wage growth versus the combined cost of the 5 most essential, non-negotiable living expenses.
That is the true measure of the prosperity gap.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.